that the gains were very little and the losses for the nation were too huge. That's the one thing. Second, economic rationale has come into decision making. That is a very positive thing, Neeraj. The way the address was done, the depth into which people have gone. Third, there is hope that the FM herself mentioned that 2 more such pronouncements will be made, maybe one midweek next week and one a week later. So there is hope for more decisions to come through. September 20th is the GST meeting. Hopefully some decisions come through there as well. But overall, it is a start. I look at the glass as half full, and I would say markets would welcome it. But the journey is fraught with a lot of issues. I think textiles needs to be addressed. That's 10 crore employment sitting in textiles. You have construction with state governments going back on negotiated and written contracts. You have real estate. So I think a lot more will need to be done, but it's a good first step.
Okay, Vaibhav, just one quick follow-up. The auto space was expecting a lot of moves. She said that the GST cut, the GST Council prerogatives, the scrappage policy and GST cut are the big things. They haven't come out. What has come out is the registration fees being deferred. Good enough, or would you believe that there is more needed?
I think again a step in the right direction, purely because the depreciation rate also has been increased, which again will help some amount of aiding of demand, as well as your government freeze on buying new vehicles also has been taken out. So incremental steps are positive, but the kind of momentum we need, I think scrappage policy and actually increasing the disposable income in the hands of a consumer is needed. And when I mean increasing the income in the hands of the consumer is by either reducing actually their income tax rate and or for a sustained period of time would surely help. But that's a long ask, to be very honest.
Okay, Vaibhav, we'll leave it at that. Thanks so much for taking the time out. Ajay, just stay on. I just want one more question, but lots happening on the economy as well, and I believe Shubhda Rao is also with us.
Yeah, no, we'll just do a quick conversation on the economy. It looks like they're focused on sector-specific measures, and they're not looking at any large fiscal stimulus. The sector-specific measures also sort of dispersed. Do they have some impact? We'll ask that question to Shubhda Rao, Chief Economist at Yes Bank. Shubhda, evening. Thanks so much for joining us. Individual sectors which are stressed, trying to put the pieces together to say that, okay, let the economy not worsen any further. Is that the way to see it?
Yes, I think, Ira, the first thing that we note is that the government has begun to address the supply side of the issues that were staring at us, particularly on, removing the constraints to improve the credit flows, the fund flows, and so on. So today's set of measures, I would believe, are more addressing comprehensively, to the extent possible in the first round, the supply side of issues. One is, of course, the 3 key immediate positives would be the removal of surcharge, the bank recapitalization to get front-loaded, and the third one would be more importantly the MSMEs.
Just allow me to interrupt, because we've got RC Bhargava of Maruti Suzuki on the line. I just need to take a couple of questions with him, and then I promise we will come back to you. Mr. Bhargava, thanks so much for joining in. You've been very candid that you probably don't expect too much from the government, and maybe the government can't do too much for the auto space, but they have given out a couple of announcements: registration fees deferred, and they said that the scrappage policy and the GST cut, which are the big things, not come out thus now, might come later on. Your initial reaction to what you've just heard?
I think there have been some very positive things which were within the scope of what government could do, and they have done what I think was possible. And it's very, very heartening that the finance minister heard the auto industry and has responded so quickly to what was suggested from us. But the couple of things which are very important which need to be looked at. The sentiment for purchase of automobiles is a major thing. And the announcements by the finance minister in very clear terms have made it absolutely evident to people that IC vehicles are not vehicles which are going out or something's going to happen to them in the near future. The decision that government will immediately start buying cars, and these will be IC cars, sends a very strong message to the people that the policy relating to IC vehicles is very positive. And I think that's a big step which has been taken.
Yeah.
The financing costs have been brought down. That's the other thing. Because registration fees and all that is, yes, all done. But more important for the long term are the arrangements which have been made for the financing of cars, which will come down and which will be linked to the repo rates. I think that's a very major step and which has long-term implications. The ability of finance officials bank officials to take decisions without worrying about vigilance and other things and the mechanism to make it happen, that's a very long-term and a very, very important step which has been taken, whose implications are huge. I think that's a very positive step.
True.
So when these steps get taken and which are going to affect the economy as a whole, the auto sector is bound to benefit.
Okay. Just one final word, Mr. Bhargava. I mean, maybe the GST cut may or may not come because it's the GST Council's prerogative. She maintained that. But if indeed something around the scrappage policy gets announced next week itself, which is seemingly likely, or maybe in 10 days from now, how big a fillip would that be?
So scrappage policy will immediately give a fillip to demand because of the scrappage of old vehicles. But it all depends on the details of the policy and of the infrastructure which exists for implementing it. It's not easy to suddenly implement a scrappage policy. You may announce the policy, but the implementation will take time. But again, a scrappage policy announcement itself will help you change sentiment. I think that's the important part.
Yes, it is. Great. Mr. Bhargava, thank you so much. Sorry. Yeah, please finish your point, sir.
One last point I was making. The real step which I'm hoping will now be taken will be by some of the state governments who have increased road tax recently. And I hope they see the approach of the central government and understand that they have also to help in reviving industry. And they also roll back, like registration charges, the road taxes which they have imposed recently.
Okay, well, let's see if that happens. Mr. Bhargava, I hope somebody's listening to you. Thank you so much for taking the time out and speaking to us today. I know Jabagga is with us, but Shubhda, you were replying to Ira's question to you.
Yes. Yes, so I think, auto, of course, they've tried to enhance demand, as Mr. Bhargava was also saying, that, the whole lifting of the ban of the purchases of cars by the government. More importantly, I think increasing the depreciation, which renders a car completely, ready for next round is within 3 years. Earlier, it was 5 years. So that itself would also bring in some demand. As was being earlier said, once a more detailed scrappage policies taken on board, that would also, and lastly the assurance that through the deferment of the BS4 vehicles up to March 2020, and also the registration being deferred right up to June 2020, all these are demand enhancing measures for the auto sector. But to a comprehensive set of supply side constraints getting eased, let's not forget that we do not have completely unlimited recourse to the stimulus in terms of outright cash injection than what has been announced in the budget currently at government's disposal, particularly when the revenue has been slow to come by the time we still close the first half of the year. So it was important for the government to listen on the ground what were the constraints that were limiting the flows, and that is what has been a very, very positive development today, that this appears to be the finance minister has taken seriously all the concerns on board and has begun to address this. As I said, the near upfront first set of measures that we believe will bring in some growth kicker should be the the PSU recapitalization, the quick clearing of the GST refunds through the MSMEs to the MSMEs, and also improving the sentiment through the FPI route. A 3.3 billion outflow since budget on equity side was clearly getting to be a point of concern, and all these seem to be getting addressed addressed, with the promise of more to come. I think there has been a pleasant surprise as compared to the past, where expectations used to typically ride much higher than the actual delivered promises. But today has been a different day. We've seen a set of measures which actually come closer to the expectations that seemed on hindsight running ahead.
Shraddha, two quick questions. So, both the Reserve Bank of India and the government now, and even in the budget actually, seem to be banking on this let's revive credit flow to actually get the economy growing. And in that, it's not just the quantum of money flowing to the economy, but also the price of money flowing to the economy. Do those measures taken together do anything, you think? Absolutely. Because this external benchmarking, I still want to see it see how it plays out on the ground before saying, yay, we've got better transmission.
Yes. No, true, absolutely. It's work in progress. We need to see how it actually translates into a higher improved demand. But it's a beginning that, linking it to repo rate, particularly the consumption of personal loans, that it brings to effect the cost of these purchases lower is a beginning. But as I said, this is one part of measures. The bigger issue is how do you put money into the hands of people to buoy and boost the demand side of story, and that is something which is going to be a longer playing story, because we need to see all those cash transfers, all the rural economy monies that have been promised to see the light of the day in earlier part of the FY20, so that some demand is more visible, particularly starting the festive season, October, December. So I would say, Ida, that these coming 40 days are going to be very, very critical as to how both the demand side and the supply side are fashioned to bring in growth, at least in the H2 of the fiscal year. Remember, the first half is nearly significant slowing of growth momentum from 5.8 of the previous quarter. The first quarter we are penciling in a 5.5% growth of GDP. The second quarter is not likely to have any significant upside. So it leaves a lot of hope and expectations towards the second half of the year, which, if the government really does deliver on these measures over the next 30 to 40 days, I would think there would be at least an arrest of the expectation of a continuing downturn or downdraft in terms of growth momentum. But having said, I think most of us analysts have looked to revise our GDP much lower. In fact, in our earlier show with you on the Monetary Policy Day, we did say that RBI's 6.9 GDP for the year looks a little tad ambitious, and we were all in the process of marking down because of the first half of a fairly concerning slowdown of the economic momentum. So 40 days and then we are all set. Monsoon has been positive. Oil has once again become a more supportive factor. If the consumption loans continue to get lower, that will to some extent help the demand side. But we would all be looking more closely as to how these measures on the ground translate into some high frequency numbers over the next 40 days.
All right, Shraddha, you preempted and answered my last question, so I'll leave it at that. Look forward to your detailed analysis over the course of the next few days. Neeraj, I'll give it back to you.
Thanks a lot for that, Ida. So, well, that's essentially the sum and substance on the economic side. Now, there are two or three things that you got to monitor from a market's perspective. One, that the FPI issue, and there's some clarity in it, as Vaibhav was saying, but the FPI surcharge has been restored, in the FM's word, to pre-budget levels. Two, a second announcement with regards to home buyers is coming as early as next week. This is again in the FM's words, so that's the other bit. A third set of announcements could be made soon in the week following the next one, so that is something that you want to watch out for. And while registration fees have been deferred to June 2020, the GST cut is GST Council's prerogative, so don't look at that. Scrappage policy and will be something that will come out as well. Ajay Bagga is back with us. Mr. Bagga, thank you so much for being patient with us today. Now, a couple of questions. Firstly, with regards to autos, now the opinion amongst the market people as well is divided about whether or not something needs to be done ASAP, something as big as a GST cut or no. Now, that is the GST Council's prerogative. If indeed there is some tinkering with the scrappage policy and this registration fees deferred to June 2020, does it lift merely the spirits, or do you think it has the power to lift sales in light of the fact that we are on cusp of the festive season?
Yeah, I think the latter, Neeraj, you put it well. See, the monsoon has now gone into surplus, so that is positive for the Rabi crop. That is positive sentiments. Second major thing is liquidity returning to the markets. Already you have overnight 2 lakh crores of liquidity that RBI has put in. Rates out of 110 basis points, about 35 basis points so far has been transmitted. But as the festive season comes in, you will see subventions from dealers as well as manufacturers being added to the rate cuts. So you will have good EMI offers from the banks. NBFCs will be largely missing apart from the top 4-5 NBFCs who can get financing. And that has been the big issue for autos because NBFC credit has fallen about 30% year on year post the ILFS crisis. We are seeing a real crisis in the NBFC and they are big on lenders. They are as much as 23% of the total credit of the country. So out of the 23%, if it falls 30%, that's a big hole that the banks have to make up. And that's why the overall credit in the country is 10% or below. The festive season, subvention from manufacturers, discounts on BS4 vehicles, the enhanced depreciation which will be used by corporates to change vehicles, to do tax planning. I think all that will lead to a feel-good factor. Scrappage policy, we'll have to wait and watch how well it comes in. Does it become a cash for clunkers? You know, just to give you an idea, in the US, from as much as 18 million vehicles sold in 2007, it fell off to 9 million. It was a 50% drop. But within 2 years, thanks to this cash for clunkers and other liquidity measures, the automobile numbers came back to 15 million within 2 years. So that's the possibility on auto. It's a very stimulus,
leading industry.
Yeah, which really responds very fast. That's why we call it a high-frequency indicator. The moment you take care of the sentiments and you provide some liquidity, people take a chance in buying.
Well, let's see.
I think it could be positive. Let's wait and watch. But again,
I have a bigger question though, Mr. Bagga, and that's my final question for this show. We know that the economy is facing issues. Now, if indeed this liquidity freeze and money back to SMEs and MSMEs and other businesses helps recover some bit of the liquidity squeeze, it's great. Time will tell. But the economy as of now is facing a squeeze. China today has said that they will retaliate with tariffs on the US. This one time or this set of measures that have come out thus far, will they prove to be slightly long-term or medium-term in nature in that sense? Or do you think it will be a day-lived rally and then if the markets go back to basics, which is looking at the trade war and the issues thereof and the fact that the Indian income is hurting as well, the trajectory is downwards? What's your estimate as of now?
Trajectory is downwards, Neeraj, and always follow the money, follow the FIIs. FIIs have been so hugely short and the Indian retailer foolishly has been long. They have got butchered in July and August. FIs remain short. There's a huge overhang in the market. And that is global, that is economic, that is corporate earnings. And that needs a very strong revival package, which probably will come in February. It's too much to expect midterm. And but all I will say is this is sentimentally positive. It gives you a boost for a day or two. but it doesn't change the fundamentals. That's the big issue. And unless you see FIs changing those shorts that they are holding in the market, which they have consistently held right after the elections, I don't see this market rallying very fast.
Okay, Ajay Bhargava, always a pleasure having you. Thank you so much for taking the time out and giving us your wisdom. Well, that's the view from Ajay Bhargava as a market veteran. Vaibhav Sanghvi saying that he needs some clarity on whether Category 3 AIFs have been granted the necessary leeways or no. But this is sentimentally positive. From what I read on social media, the SGX Nifty, which had corrected a bit when China slapped tariffs on the US, recovered a bit of that as well. So interesting moves there. Let's wait and watch what happens on Monday morning. In all probability, if I remember Samir Arora's interaction with me, that if the markets get a feeling that the government is listening to what the market wants to say, the markets will rally. We'll probably have a rally. We have a rally at our hand in all probability on Monday morning, at least in the Indian markets. Let's see if that lasts for a durable period of time or it is short-lived. But thanks so much for tuning into this coverage. More news and updates on BloombergQuint. Do log on to the website and try and read all about what the finance minister has said. Lots of stories around that, the nuances and the details. Thanks so much for tuning into this broadcast.